what he's trying to do is occupy.
The clear issue at the center of the war in Ukraine is Russia's unprovoked invasion and intended occupation of a sovereign nation.
We have a responsibility to ensure the conflict does not escalate and spread beyond Ukraine.
But while the West recognizes this invasion cannot stand, for now they don't know how to stop it.
We assess Putin feels aggrieved the West does not give him proper deference and perceives this as a war he cannot afford to lose.
Today we are rolling inexorably toward a world in which invasion and occupation become normalized, setting up a succession of trips to the nuclear brink with China, North Korea, and surely Iran.
I absolutely agree that the threat is increasing.
There is an alternative between the devil of World War III and the deep blue sea of a full Putin seizure of Ukraine. As of this date, one significant, fully free city exists in Ukraine. That is Lviv. Before it's too late, the world, led by NATO, should guarantee Lviv's status as a free city, just as in 1948 the Western powers did for West Berlin. At the end of World War II, Germany was divided into zones of occupation by the victorious armies. Though the capital of Berlin was in the Soviet-occupied East, the Western Allies refused to let Berlin be absorbed into Stalin's communist bloc. Berlin was divided into sectors, with West Berlin protected by the United States, Britain, and France, and East Berlin by the Russians.
In August, Russia decided on a trumped-up excuse to cut off the Allied sectors of Berlin.
In June 1948, Joseph Stalin chose to test the West's post-war resolve by abruptly blockading all means of Allied access to Berlin.
Barges and road transports were stopped.
With access to food and electricity cut off, West Berliners were starving.
It seemed that they, too, must be at the mercies of the Russians.
President Harry Truman's options: evacuate all Berliners, negotiate some deal with the Soviets, or come up with a way to resupply West Berlin.
This time, the governments of the West did not give way.
Rather than lose West Berlin, President Truman and the European allies created the Berlin Airlift, flying food and coal daily into the city. It remains one of the West's finest hours.
On a scale never before contemplated in history, standing firm had been vindicated.
Just as the three major Allied powers occupied the western sector of Berlin then, NATO, which was created during the Berlin blockade, should assert and establish control of Lviv today. So long as Lviv is free, Mr. Putin will never occupy Ukraine. A free Lviv would stand as a counter-precedent to Russian occupation and permit President Zelensky to avoid exile and establish a legitimate government on his nation's own soil for as long as necessary. Watching what Mr. Putin has done to Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Mariupol, a protected, untouched Lviv would stand as a multi-nation rebuke to the war crimes mercilessly committed by Mr. Putin and his associates.
With supplies being cut off, it will become somewhat desperate in, I would say, 10 days to 2 weeks.
Predictably, the all-purpose rebuttal to NATO encircling Lviv is that it would provoke Putin. Similar fears of a Soviet reaction preceded the Berlin Airlift. Back then, of course, American statesmen like General Lucius Clay took a broader outlook to the ramifications of not acting.
We are convinced that our remaining in Berlin is essential to our prestige in Germany and in Europe. Whether for good or bad, it has become a symbol of the American intent.
President Biden has promised no U.S. troops in Ukraine, but he did say this:
the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
A free Lviv protected by NATO in unoccupied Ukraine would restore that intent for this generation.